everyone, and welcome to the Facilities in Focus podcast. My name is Mackenna Moralez, and I am the Associate Editor of FacilitiesNet and your host. Today, I am joined by Maureen Roskoski, the Vice President of FEA. In her position, Maureen collaborates with clients on a range of asset management challenges, including strategic planning, facility planning, resilience planning, and workforce development consulting. Thank you for joining me today, Maureen. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so as this trend of this podcast series seems to be, we are not talking about like the most lighthearted subject in the world. So it's been almost 2 years since this happened, and for our listeners who might not remember, the Hawaii wildfires broke out in the summer of 2023, predominantly on the island of Maui. The fires were largely spread by heavy winds, prompting immediate evacuations for citizens across the island and caused widespread damage. It is estimated that around 102 people died as a result of the fires. And unfortunately, Maureen, you were in Maui when this occurred. Can you please tell me a little bit about your experience?
Sure. So it was a vacation and it was a little bit impromptu and I only planned it a couple months before, taking advantage of being in California for work. And I spent some time on the Big Island and then flew to Maui. And I flew in the morning of the wildfire. And I drove across the island. So I was in Lahaina at about 1 p.m. The day of the fire, and power was already out. So there was a hurricane passing by, but it was 500 miles away.
Okay.
And so it was very windy. It was a red flag day. It was a windy day. And so the wind caused power outages, power lines to be down. And as I drove and got closer to the area I was staying, one of the images that stays in my mind is there were coconuts all over the road,
Oh, that's
right?
interesting.
You don't normally see that. So there's power lines down and you're driving through, but there's just coconuts all over the road. And it's something that stayed with me because it was so unusual. And so I said, I really need to get to this hotel. So I get to
Mhm.
my hotel and all the power is out. No communications at all. No cell phone, no text, nothing is working already at 1 p.m. that day.
Oh.
And from reading incidents after and reading everything about it, the fire really got going around 3 p.m.
Okay.
And I was about 2 miles north of the fire. And at the hotel, again, no power. They had an emergency generator, so the first floor and the elevator had power. So people were gathering around in the first floor. So I powered up all my stuff. I went to the little market and got some water and some non-perishable food, just trying to get prepared, but really
Mhm.
had no idea what was going on.
That's scary.
Yeah. And then at about, I guess, early that evening, there's just a lot of, you could smell smoke in the air. The winds
Mhm.
were like 60, 70 miles an hour. And by the time like sunset was setting in and I was going up to my room, I took a picture, you could see smoke. And so I knew that there was a big fire nearby, but that's kind of all that I knew at the time. And so since this is part of my job at FEA is to be in charge of our emergency preparedness, I packed a go bag and said I might be evacuated in the middle of the night, so I want to have my backpack ready. I can't take my giant suitcase, right?
Right.
So I packed a go bag and it got really dark and then all night long I heard sirens, helicopters. So it was like I knew something major was going on, but didn't know what because I couldn't communicate at all.
Oh, that's so stressful. What did you pack in your go bag?
So I packed a couple changes of clothes, my electronics, some food, and water.
Okay.
Um, just like things you would need to survive, like not knowing where you were going.
Hmm. I feel like I would never successfully pack a go bag unless I had time like ahead to
You
better plan.
Yeah, you should have a go bag right now in your house, wherever you live, because we'll talk about this, but it's just so many different things that could happen that we've got to be ready to go. And
Right.
so it was a long, long, very dark night. And in the morning, I put my cell phone out on the balcony. I said, I'm gonna leave it out there. Let's just see if I get any reception. And I heard a ding. Then I heard another ding. And then it was like ding, 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 ding. And all these texts were coming in. And people were like, "Are you okay? There's a massive wildfire. I know you're on Maui. Um, this is the worst disaster in state history," like all this stuff. And it was like, oh my God, I had no idea what was going on so close to
Mhm.
me. But I couldn't really get texts out. It was the
Right.
really weird thing. Like, I know one of the things we're going to talk about is the lessons learned. And
Mhm.
that was a big one, that communications will fail. And
Mhm.
everybody tells us that, and you hear it, but I don't think you grasp it until you're there and you have no communication, nothing. And so I was sort of crowdsourcing, trying to figure out what was going on, because texts would come in and I could get out like one word maybe. So to my mom, who knew where I was, I got out, "I am safe."
Thank goodness.
Right? She was like, this is the longest, like 6 hours, 8 hours of her life, because she didn't know where I was and if I was safe.
Mhm.
But that's about it. So people
Yeah.
were telling me what was going on 2 miles
Right.
away from where I was.
Right. I can't imagine being in the position where you are actually there and have to be told what is happening. I know that happened a lot for the citizens of Asheville this past summer with the hurricane because they also had no means of communication. And when they would get that glimpse, people would be like, "Are you okay?" And they had no idea what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrifying. I try to figure out, was it better or worse not knowing? So there's the anxiety in not knowing. And I'm hearing all this stuff from friends and family. And I just thought, okay, today I think my safest thing is to stay. Everyone kept saying, you have to get out, you have to get out. And
Hmm.
I was like, I don't know where to go. I don't know exactly where this is happening, you know.
Right. Was the airport even open by that time?
I don't know if the airport was open or not. This was on like the other side of the airline of the island from the airport. But
Hmm.
again, what I learned after the sort of unfolding, it was about a 3 day where I was essentially trapped in this hotel, which I didn't realize how exactly trapped I was, because
Right.
the fire was 2 miles south of me. And it was devastating and fast and just obliterated this area. So you couldn't go to the south, right? That
Hmm.
road was closed. You couldn't go to the south. And what I found out on day 2, I started to realize with some other people in the hotel that you couldn't go to the north, because
Okay.
the north was like windy, impassable roads that most cars can't go on. So you were trapped.
Oh.
That was an anxious feeling for sure.
How how did you get out? What was that process like?
So, like I said, day 1 was sort of, you don't know what's going on. Day 2 is where I got all the text of, no, something really awful was going on, but I had to stay put. And then by day 3, um, I was using my friends and family who could get access to Twitter, and they were following the Hawaii Department of Transportation on Twitter, because I couldn't find out if that road was open or not. And I had a rental
Mhm.
car, so I could get out if I could
Right.
just know if the road was closed, but I was terrified to leave and get stuck.
Right.
In the hotel, honestly, those poor people, they had no communication. So many of them didn't know if their families were alive. Like they didn't seem to have anyone that had a satellite phone that could find out. So they had very little information for us. So finally, that on day 3, my friends were saying they're saying the road is open, and my mom is like, "This is on MSNBC full time. Like, this is a big deal, Maureen." And so they said the road is open, and I said, "Okay, I'm going." And so I packed up, and the hotel, everything's down, right? So you literally wrote on a piece of paper the date that you were leaving, and that's your checkout procedure, and hope for the best. And they had the National Guard all along the road. So they were pointing you exactly where to go. It was only letting people out of the area, letting no one in the area. And it was just, complete devastation. The whole entire, like, you're in this road and you look left to right and it's just completely obliterated. It was still smoking. There were still power lines that were like sparking on the ground. And it was just very odd and scary.
So can you remind me, the whole fire lasted 3 days? Or
No,
it was longer than that, right?
no, it was shorter than that. That's the scary
Okay.
part. So it was literally that day. And I think by day 2, they had it out. And some of the saddest stories about it is that many people died in their car trying to get out. And that was that trapped feeling that there's one way out of this area. And the way that they were going, the fire was coming across. So you're trying to get out and you're in traffic, you can't move, and the fire is just moving with these 60-mile-an-hour winds. And that's why people jumped in the ocean, because they couldn't go anywhere except that way. And so it was the wind that really made this such a horrific event.
Right. And I know that they say that the number of deaths is probably 102, or 102, but it's most likely larger than that. Do you think?
Again, the awful thing is, and I probably read way too much about this when I got back. Like,
You had to know. How
I
could you
had to
not?
know, is they were literally sifting through ashes to determine human remains. Like, it was a flash fire that was sparked by a downed power line, and then just spread so fast and furious that people couldn't escape.
Right. And when we previously talked, we both said how neither one of us knew that Hawaii, that this was actually not necessarily a common thing for
But that
Hawaii,
it could
but
happen. Yeah.
right, that it could happen.
So one of the last Monday or Tuesday, was a red flag day here in Colorado, which means high wind and potential fire concerns. And it was the anniversary of the Marshall Fire, which happened here in Colorado. That was a similar kind of event, that with high winds, that was a 100-mile-an-hour wind day, that this fire spread so fast that it burned over 1,000 structures, but within about a day and a half. And I think the Lahaina fire was like that too. It just happened so fast. And it was my same thought. Like, honestly, when I thought about all this, right? Like, I'm a planner. And again, I said I do this for a living. So when there was a hurricane, I'm looking at it, I'm watching the track. I knew that it was a red flag day, or at least a high wind day that day in Maui. And I looked at the hurricane, it's 500 miles away, it's not heading towards the island. I'm thinking, okay, I'll have a very windy day and it could be bad, but it's probably just one bad day. So I made the risk and said, I'm going to go anyway.
Right.
I never thought of Hawaii as wildfire. You think if it's a tropical paradise, it's moisture, it's so humid there.
Right.
And that's one thing I did. So I didn't know the area. I didn't know that this was the dry side of the island. I didn't know that this area had been in severe drought that year. So all these things I didn't know that would have at least made the risk seem higher.
Do you know how common wildfires are, not even for Maui, but just in general. I know that you're in Colorado, and that seems to be more of a high risk area.
Yeah. So in Colorado now, they're telling us that wildfire season is all year long. And this is 2 Decembers where we've had fire risk. One was a
Mm-hmm.
really terrible fire, and then this last week was a fire risk. And it's drought, right? It's a little bit of drought, but it's also the winds. And
Right,
even the term wildfire, you think of it in forests. You don't think of it
right,
happening in a suburb, right? In a
right.
city. And it's one of the big takeaways is to remember that, climate change is real and this is our new reality, and that fire risk is spreading across the country. It's not just for the West anymore. It's
Mm-hmm.
really a potential risk in other places too.
Right. And for our listeners, Maureen actually wrote a very in detail article about her experience during the Maui wildfires that I can link below in our show description. Um, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. And I'm so sorry for everyone that had to live through that, because I'm sure that just sparked a new fear for you, and that is not necessarily a fair way to live or anything, but you made it through. You're back home now. What were some lessons that you learned from this experience?
Yeah. So I think, like I mentioned, recognizing that communications will fail and try to be ready for that. It's hard because there's not a lot of other options. But one of the things I did have with me was a Garmin InReach, which is a little GPS, but it has a satellite radio function. So the very first day, I was able to use that to text my mom to say I am safe. Um, it was very weird. She's like, I just got this text from a weird number that said I am safe, but at least I could get something out. And
Right.
my company, we do a tabletop exercise every year internally. And this year we did one of our employees the scenario was one of our employees was lost on a national park, because we do a lot of national park work.
Mhm.
And how did we handle that, and what could we have done? And we talked a lot about the different gadgets that are available now with satellite radio capabilities. And they're like Starlink has small things you can get, but that's something that works when all the cell phone towers and everything are down. So that's one thing, that consider some of those things for you. The other big thing is all of us, we've got to take emergency warnings more seriously.
Right.
Um, like I said, I knew that it was a high wind day, and I thought about it. I thought through it, but I thought it was going to be one day. I thought it was a low risk. But now, when we get red flag days here, I take them seriously. Like last week when we had that red flag day, I was supposed to go into the office, and I said, I'm going to work from home instead. I'm going to have my go bag ready, and I'm going to be ready to evacuate.
Mhm.
Um, because when you have that kind of situation where it's wind and fire risk, it's like that, right? It could
Right.
happen in an instant, and suddenly you have to evacuate. So taking those emergency warnings seriously and doing preparations, right? I think we can prepare, and
Right.
then we can have a better outcome. So, you said lighthearted. So thinking about the things that helped me there, I had brought a headlamp too, because I was going to hike, right? So I was going to hike. So this is why I had these things. I'm not a weirdo.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense. I'm not much of a hiker, so I probably would have never thought. I would be so screwed in an emergency situation. If you're saying like have a satellite with you, and I'm like I can't read a map, so I would need someone with me at all times. But go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's
You
funny.
had a
I mean,
you
the
had a
headlamp was
headlamp.
something that was amazing when you were trying to go to the bathroom in complete darkness. I think that's the other thing we forget about when you lose power at night, it is completely dark.
Right.
The other lighthearted thing is, like remember to download things on your tablet, like TV shows and movies, because if you have 3 days without power, you start to go a little, stir crazy. And I remember, so I remember how I said the first floor had power. So they set up extension cords in these ballrooms. And so everyone was down there at a table and you're sitting there charging up your stuff. And so you're talking to the people around you. And there was a family, really nice, and they had a teenage daughter. And she just kept saying, why isn't there Wi-Fi?
Oh,
And the mom was like, there's no power. And she's like, but why isn't there Wi-Fi? She couldn't comprehend that you needed power to get Wi-Fi, to get internet connection, because you're just so used to everywhere you go, you have Wi-Fi.
right.
She really could not understand. I don't understand why there's not Wi-Fi.
That is a very, oh. Were you able to be in the rooms or did you have to stay in like the ballroom the
No,
entire
so
time?
we would go to our rooms. So the one good thing is they still had water, right? So that's the other, you could still use the toilets and the showers. So that was really good because that could really make things go sour fast.
Right.
They would leave like toilet paper out in the lobby so you could grab that if you needed. They weren't doing any kind of services and food was scarce. Like I mentioned, just because the power was out and everything, I went and got some of the non-perishable and water from the little market. It was like a resort, so there's a little market. The next morning, I thought, geez, I better get some more. Everything was gone.
Dang.
And then they couldn't get supplies in, so they were sort of
Mm-hmm.
using what they had on hand. And so the next day, they did a breakfast, but it was like just buffet, right? So they put out whatever they had, and they couldn't take credit cards, right? Nothing was working, so you had to have had a credit card on file, which normal people would. But one of the things I learned was there were airline pilots who were staying there,
Oh
and
no.
they didn't have to put a credit card down, I don't know, for whatever reason, so they couldn't get food.
Were people being generous at least?
I will say people were very good. People kept up good spirits. There was no real anger or fights. People did get irritated about the line and getting food and all of that. And if you wait in line for an hour and then they're like, we can't serve you because you didn't have a credit card on file. But
Mm-hmm.
people were very, very good. The other thing that happened was sort of rumors flew around, right? Because
Right.
you don't have a good access to say what's real or not. So there were a lot of rumors that were going around, and that was hard because you really just want to know what's going on. Can I get out? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah,
And it's almost like the two aren't comparable at all, but it's like when all the planes got grounded in Newfoundland after 9/11 with the rumors because they didn't know
yeah,
anything and essentially just being trapped in a place and not knowing when you're
yeah,
able to go home.
yeah. There's a really good book that was written about that, and how the local people took them into their houses, and that was a really neat event.
Yeah. It's also a musical. Come
Yes,
from
is it
away.
musical too? Oh wow.
Yes. Um, so that's how I know about it.
Okay.
But how did the experience shape your perspective as a consultant? What do you tell people now?
Yeah, I think it's those two main things. Take the warning seriously and be better prepared. So think about the risks to your property. And there's a new ASTM standard on property resilience assessments that just came out. And it's all about thinking about what are the risks to our physical property and planning for it. So, it's unfortunate, but like I said, our climate is changing and storms are getting more powerful. We having more droughts. So we've got new risks that we
Right.
got to take into account. And the you mentioned Asheville, North Carolina. So that flash flooding took them by complete surprise. They even used to call Asheville a climate haven because it was inland. They thought it was sort of immune to all the climate change driven hazards.
Mhm.
And then look what happened with the flash flooding. And so it's one of those things that we've got to really think about the changes and how to prepare for them. Um, so doing more of a risk assessment and thinking about your facility. So the flash flooding is an interesting one because that's another one I don't think people take seriously.
Right.
Right? You get a flash flooding warning. I remember a couple years ago, it was the US Open tennis, and there was a flash flood warning for the city or Long Island where it is. And they didn't change, they didn't close, they didn't reschedule or anything. They kept it going, and the subways flooded that night, and people couldn't get out.
Mhm.
And our weather people are pretty good, right? Maybe they get some of the day-to-day stuff wrong, but when they know when hurricanes are coming now, they know the track. We can take these things seriously and just adjust a little bit, and
Mhm.
think about what we can do in our properties to make our facilities more resilient against these risks.
Right. So you mentioned a couple times about having a go bag. Um, I'm sure facilities managers don't necessarily have that. What is something that you would recommend that what's like 5 things that you recommend that a facility manager have at all times in their building in an
Ooh, that's
emergency situation?
that's a good one. Um, so I'm thinking about like what we did at our company. We have what we called a little go bag that the person who's in charge during an emergency would grab as everyone's evacuating. One
Mhm.
of the things that's hardest for facilities managers is to know who's in the building. So when you
Right.
evacuate, first responders are going to come and say, is everybody out? And it's one of the hardest questions to answer now because we have a lot of different people coming in on different days, and a lot of people don't have sign in, sign out, or a lot of places will have sign in, like you badge
Right.
in, but you don't badge out. So
Okay.
a lot of times it's hard to know who's in the building. So some way of knowing who's in the building, whether it's a sign in, sign out sheet. We have a very simple Google spreadsheet that people sign in out. So when you grab that, you can pull it up on your phone and they could say, if people do it, here's who was in the building, and then I'm looking, here's everybody got out. Um, Flashlights, headlamps, some kind of satellite radio functionality, walkie-talkies, food, water, like those thermal blankets if you can have them. Think
Right.
about where if you were either stuck outside for a while or you were stuck without power for a while, those things that you would need.
How do you stay motivated and resilient in the face of such a life-changing event?
It was really hard when I thought about writing the article. What I went through was so minimal compared to what the people who lost their families or their homes or anything like that, that I really wanted to try to write it and talk about it like this in a way that isn't like poor me, but is, hey, here are the things that could have gone better. Here are the things
Right.
that, we could do to help ourselves if we're in a situation like that. And like I said, I really do think that with information, we can be better prepared. So it's a little bit of, taking your head out of the sand and saying, again, this is our new reality. Let's think about it. For certain properties, it's going to be different risks. So it's not like we have to plan for every single potential terrible thing that could happen.
Mhm.
But let's be smart about it and think about what are the real risks to our properties and our facilities. And I still, think that there's a lot of things we can do to combat climate change and reduce all this too. So I think all those things are things that can be helpful. And
Right.
every incident that happens, we learn from.
Mhm.
And it is one thing that the state of Hawaii is really trying to learn from, and the counties. So they did a full after action report, and you can
Mhm.
read it. It's public. I read it, and it talks about what went wrong and what could we do better next time. And that's the mindset we have to have,
Right.
because we make some mistakes, and things that we thought were going to work won't work. And so we just need to say, okay, that didn't work. It's okay. Let's figure out what we would do next time to be to handle it better.
Great. And I think as facility managers know that it's better to be proactive than reactive.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all I have for you today, Maureen. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time, and I'm glad that you're safe and here with us today.
Thank you, Mackenna.
Thank you for listening to the Facilities in Focus podcast. Facilities in Focus is a product of the facility market, which houses FacilitiesNet, building operating management, facilities maintenance decisions, and healthcare facilities today. Thank you to our sound and video editor, Paul Ellertson. Thank you to Morgan Johnson for designing our logo. Thank you to Dan Welton, Dave Lubach, Dan Hounsell, Jeff Warden, Jill McDermott, and everyone else at Trade Press Media Group. For comments, or if you are interested in being a guest on Facilities in Focus, please email us at fnpodcast@tradepress.com.